In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a handful of basic chains using simple techniques, no soldering, and some basic tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the tools that you are likely to use while making chains with you, and then I'll show you how I'm going to kind of group out the chains that we're going to do into different categories, and then we'll get started. So some of the tools that you're going to need when you get started making chain are first your mandrels. And so you should have a set of wood dowels that are labeled with different measurements for the dowel size. And you've got a nice selection of different dowel sizes here to work with. You're also going to need your pliers, and you're going to use all the different pliers that you have. You're going to use your chain nose and your flat nose and your round nose, and you're also really going to want to have your flush cutters when you're making chain. You're also going to need your jeweler saw and saw blades, and when I'm making chain, I prefer to use the finer saw blades, so typically like a 4/0 or smaller. It's gonna depend on the gauge of wire or sheet that you're using to make your chains, but generally speaking, especially for cutting wire and jump rings and things like that, I prefer at least a 4/0, sometimes even thinner. Okay, so you're also going to want to have your steel bench block and your planishing hammer, as well as your nylon hammer. We're going to use all of these for forging and for straightening and flattening out wire and things like that. We're also going to need our file, so our regular hand file, and then also your needle files. Those are going to come in handy. You're going to want to have a small ruler, preferably with both millimeters and inches on it. Let's see, I think that covers most of the tools that you'll probably need. It'll depend on your specific chain. You might need some additional things. And I also want to talk about materials. So generally when we're fabricating, we're going to be using either sheet metal or wire. And depending on your design, that's going to kind of determine the gauge that you're going to want to use. Because we're not soldering these chains, we're doing unsoldered chains. In general, you're going to want to use a thicker gauge so that your chain can be stronger, since it's not going to have soldered closures to keep things really nice and strong. You're going to depend on the thickness of the metal itself and the hardness of the material to keep the structural integrity of your chain. So you're going to want to have a selection of different gauges of wire, and then also some sheet metal to work with. And when we talk about wire, obviously you have round wire, but I wanted to point out that there's also a ton of other shapes that are available, and they all come in a really wide variety of gauges. And so depending on the shape of wire or the gauge of wire that you select, that could have a really different visual impact on your chain if you use round wire versus like triangular wire or square wire. So I'm just going to show you a couple of different options. This is a rectangular wire, and it's basically just like a thin strip of a thick gauge sheet. It comes in different measurements, different thicknesses and widths. This is square wire. It's a heavier gauge square wire, but just changing it up from round to square and making like your jump rings out of square wire totally changes the look and feel of your chain and can make it a little bit more interesting. This is half round wire, so it has one flat side, and then it has a half round side. And that's a nice choice, especially for like making jump rings and making like a Rollo style chain. There's also something called bead wire, And this wire is just divided into little segments that look like round beads, and it comes in a bunch of different gauges, so you can get really fine bead wire or a larger style bead wire like this. You can also texture your own wire. So this is just round wire that like a heavy round wire that I textured with a hammer texture. Let's see if we can get that to focus here. And that really is going to change the look and feel of your chain too. If you give it a nice hammered texture, or you know, file some notches into it or saw some notches into it periodically on the wire, it's going to give you a nice texture. There are also patterned wires that you can purchase that come with a pattern milled into the wire. So here's 3 different styles of pattern wire. Not sure how well you can see these. This is a square pattern wire that comes with a floral pattern. You can see that. Kind of a scrolly floral pattern. That's pretty nice. This one is just kind of a faceted style. And then this one is just a different style of pattern wire that's available at Rio Grande. But there's a whole bunch of different styles and sizes available from all the different suppliers. So something to think about if you're, you know, wanting to venture away from just the round wire. And then as far as sheet metal, again, just think about how strong your piece needs to be. So if you have small, very open links that you're making with sheet, they're going to need to be a thicker gauge than something that's a larger, more solid link shape. You can get away with a little bit thinner of a gauge if something's a little bit larger. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, and then I want to just go over the chain samples that I have here, and I've kind of divided them into, I think, 4 different categories. So for demonstration purposes, we're going to kind of group these into like a wrapped or a bent chain style, and we'll demonstrate these in a group. These are sheet metal chains, so working just with sheet, not with wire. This grouping here, these are forged chains. And then this smaller grouping here is just chains that really utilize the jump ring in various ways. So that's going to be how I'm going to break it down for our demos. And let's get started.